Hello, this is John Spink. I'm Director of the Food Fraud Initiative at Michigan State University and an Assistant Professor in the College of Veterinary Medicine. And this is my presentation, GFSI Cooperation on Food Fraud Prevention. This is presented at the GFSI China Local Group General Meeting, October 26, 2017, here in China. First off, before we get started, we are academics and research is the core of what we do. We currently have a food fraud terminology survey open right now. It will close on October 31st, but if you're seeing this after October 31st, please feel free to continue to take the survey. We will continue to gather data, but the 31st is our main closing date. This data will be used for many different reasons, and we have the survey link there, and including a QR code. At any time in any of these presentations, please feel free to take any pictures of them and use them later. Also, as academics, a focus for us is curriculum, or teaching, and the classes. We have a cycle where research, education, and outreach continue to feed each other. For example, this presentation is outreach. I'll present to you, interact, and learn from you. We'll take that back into our research and conduct new research, and that will then be used in our education, our courses and programs, which in turn will come back to outreach. This is a continuous cycle that's really important, and you are an important part of that process. The first course we have is a MOOC, a massive open online course. This is free, open, and online. We have two that we conduct right now but are growing. Food Fraud Overview MOOC, which is offered twice a year in mid-May and mid-November since 2013, and the Food Fraud Audit Guide MOOC, which actually there's one that's currently open now. If you go to our website and look at Register Now, you can find the link. A key is that these are free. The content is free. The content is always free. Next, we have education, executive education. These are short courses conducted usually over about a week, and they're on-site, live with different stakeholders. We also have graduate courses. These are online, real Michigan State University graduate courses, but they are offered all online, so international students or people that travel can take these courses without any conflict. We have 5 basic courses that cover food fraud in one way or another. If you complete and successfully complete 4 of those courses, then you can earn a graduate certificate in food fraud prevention. Again, this is completely online. Those credits can be rolled into a Master's of Science in Food Safety. Again, this is a real Michigan State University course. Next, resources. Just as a background, here's a number of very recent resources, videos. These are on YouTube. We'll have them posted on other websites that more people have access to. Again, feel free to take pictures of the codes. Before really getting into the content, I want to take a moment to thank some of our stakeholders and supporters. And one is the Food Fraud Think Tank. They're a group of brand owners and manufacturers who have supported our work, such as travel to this location. They support our Food Fraud Initiative mission to standardized prevention practices. That's creating central documents, information, and research. We help lead strategy and policy, both for them within their company, but then also in general. And then they support us for internal and external leadership, which means that they are helping promote food fraud prevention within their companies, such as expanding culture, and externally as well, which is things like outreach. Several deliverables that have been important is we have expanded government information, such as our recent interaction with Interpol, presenting at their conference, and then as well as Codex and ISO and others. Also, the Food Fraud Audit Guide MOOC came from ideas created within the think tank. Expanded online, on-demand resources such as YouTube. We're expanding that to other platforms as well, but we try to provide, a source of video encyclopedia. Food Fraud Initiative reports. These are specific reports on specific topics. And industry benchmarking surveys. This is where things are going to get more important for industry, where we're going to be able to start to evaluate the best practices and as well as where everybody is in the programs. Also, I just want to recognize our current members are Dannon, Cargill, Wegmans, Mondelez, Hershey's, and others. Primer on food fraud prevention. I think this is one of the most important activities for a university, as well as for our engagement with GFSI and the GFSI members. One thing we've created is a primer on food fraud prevention. This is a one-page document that talks about the concepts. And a real key is how to start. people are looking for the most basic aspects of food fraud prevention, and they're looking at it holistically across their companies, trying to figure out how to manage the entire system, not just pieces of the system. And part of what we do is look more at how to implement as well. And if we're going to be implementing concepts around the world, we need to be able to communicate clearly with partners around the world. So you'll see here a recently completed Mandarin version of this. So to review the GFSI activities in food fraud and prevention, the first starting point was in 2012 when GFSI created and supported the Food Fraud Think Tank. And this started as a group just to review what was food fraud and how or if it should even be managed within GFSI. The key is that GFSI is a management system, a total quality system to look at how anomalies could occur. And so managing food fraud fits into that philosophy. Our Food Fraud Think Tank met for that time period, including presentations at the GFSI conference. And at one of the conferences, a real important concept came up of splitting the assessments, the vulnerability assessments or risk assessments, into specific separate activities. This really occurred because each risk is very different from the other risk. So it's really more efficient to conduct 3 separate vulnerability assessments, not more difficult. And when you see 3 assessments here, this does not mean there's 3 times as much work as just following HACCP. It's actually very efficient if you think only about one type of risk. It's important because we're trying to consider the motivation and then set systems up to reduce the vulnerability. So with food safety, it was HACCP, which is well known. Food defense is TACCP. TACCP had been used for threat assessments in other areas. And then really feeling that food fraud was separate when it comes to focusing on the motivation was the development of a vulnerability assessment, or VASSP. And this was summarized by the GFSI board, approved by the GFSI board, in the GFSI position on mitigating the public health risk of food fraud, published in 2014. This was the GFSI statement for what they believed should be in the guidance document that was later published in February 2017. Next, was important with the think tank was to define food fraud. What was the scope for this study? And really, it broadened to all types of fraud, from specifically usually focusing only on the worst case or a more component or substance focused on just the ingredients. Also, several other areas were added, such as production overruns, where a contract manufacturer makes more product or a different product than they were requested, and tampering of the product itself, which could be date code tampering. Traditional adulteration is up in this zone here. So you'll see that food fraud was defined by the GFSI think tank and endorsed by GFSI as much broader than just basic adulteration. An important aspect of GFSI and the think tank was presenting and sharing information. So from a conference in Barcelona in 2013, Interpol engaged as a center point. And it was interesting that Interpol really saw themselves, as you can see in the image, very much at the center. And that's, I think, an underused resource to communicate more, as they show here, to the policymakers, law enforcement, and prosecutors and judicial system. But they saw themselves at the center. And also, going more deeply, they really defined this public-private partnership and the role of Interpol as being critical in those processes. And again, those are things that will continue to evolve as we implement food fraud prevention more fully. Just a checkbox, yes and no. So there's a constant GFSI challenge or criticism that a lot of the audits are just yes or no questions, that it would be very easy for a company to just pass an audit. Well, for food fraud, I would say that that's just a checkbox, is a yes and no question. So there's that criticism. But is this the right stage for food fraud now? Is it bad for food fraud at this stage now? No, it's not bad for food fraud to ask the yes or no questions. The reason is that the formal and official process has started. When a new process is put in place, it does not go 10 feet deep or a mile wide at the start. It's just a start. And what's important is that companies are now required to conduct a vulnerability assessment and implement a prevention plan. And with those requirements, it's like a series of events that occurs. So yes or no question, yes. But there's this series of cogs that turns. So most companies will not allow just a local manager at a facility to create documentation that they would be able to officially turn over in an official audit or in an investigation if it's an incident. So what happens is that the company itself starts to review and to develop this document to the auditor. And then they have to create the document. And creating those new formal documents usually goes through a very formal approval process to begin the action. And many times that approval process can go all the way to a board-level policy group or to the general counsel. So the optimal role at the start is just to ask the yes or no questions. The optimal role at the start for the auditor is to just ask a yes or no question. Food fraud compliance requirements. So now the question gets into how to start and how much is enough. It's important to look at what GFSI's role is and what GFSI requires. So GFSI's role is to set the idea, not specifically define the standard. That's the role of the standards organizations or certification program organizations. So when we look at the compliance requirements, the general compliance requirements are 1, conduct a food fraud vulnerability assessment, yes or no. And this is key for an auditor that's starting the process, whether that's an internal auditor or a third-party auditor. Just asking a yes or no question and making sure to be formal that this is a question that's going to be asked is very important. Second, is that document written? Many times people will tell us that they have a vulnerability assessment, and we say, is it written? And it will not be written, or it won't be in one place, in one document. Third, implement a food fraud prevention strategy, yes or no. Is it written, yes or no? Again, a challenge here is that people say, oh, we have a strategy to deal with that, but they can't produce a document. They can't prove that they have an overarching control of this process. Minimally conduct an annual food fraud incident review, yes or no. Did you conduct one, yes or no? Note, and a key here, is the scope. Address all types of food fraud, yes or no. There's many instances where a company will completely and thoroughly review one aspect of food fraud but not another, such as counterfeiting, but then not consider stolen goods. Now, counterfeiting or adulterant substances may be and probably will be the most dangerous public health hazard, but the requirement is to review all types of fraud. Next, and finally, is to address all products, both incoming goods and outgoing goods, yes or no. This is a challenge as well because many times after you sell the product is outside your control. So, why and how could you conduct a vulnerability assessment? That doesn't matter. You do need to conduct a vulnerability assessment. In the case where you do give up control of the product and someone legally and competently takes ownership, your vulnerability goes down. You need to conduct a vulnerability assessment to document that. And these questions have been outlined in public and open, freely available journal articles or magazine articles in Food Safety Magazine and New Food Magazine. The takeaways for food fraud. Focus on preventing all fraud. So as a company, your goal is to prevent all fraud, not just one part of it, not just to get GFSI compliance or not just to get the Food Safety Modernization Act compliance. Your goal is to prevent all fraud. And it's really most efficient to look at all fraud when you start to look at it. All compliance. So if you're going to just look at the Food Safety Modernization Act or European Union rules, Chinese laws, or GFSI, it's really most efficient to look at all compliance at once. You're developing a system for food fraud prevention, and usually it takes only a few minor variations to meet a wide range of compliance requirements. Continue harmonization and collaboration. This is really important for GFSI as a key center point, is to create a central starting point, then apply it to unique situations. So really to have a combined activity to provide guidance at the core, and then we can adjust outwards. And the more coordinated that we are at the center and here at the beginning, the quicker we'll get to better best practices and more efficient systems and further reducing the fraud opportunity. Focus here is for the China Non-Traditional Food Safety Task Force and to the world. This is a really unique opportunity for this task force, and it's really going to be interesting to see the influence specifically starting within China but spreading throughout the world. The focus is really precise and really can have a major impact on really creating this efficiency. And when I say to the world, that's to the Codex working groups, to ISO 22000 and others. There's security standards under Technical Committee 292, the EU Food Integrity Project, the EU Food Fraud Network, and others. So GFSI has a major opportunity, especially important role of the China Non-Traditional Food Safety Task Force. We have many activities. Please feel free to contact us. I'd like to make sure to take a moment to thank many people. This research has not been done in a vacuum. It's not just been a few people sitting together. It's been a collaboration across many disciplines and across many organizations around the world. With that, I will say thank you and have a great day.